What if I told you a world-class runner could never overtake a slow-moving tortoise, no matter how fast he ran? It sounds completely wrong, a trick of words designed to confuse you. Our everyday experience screams that the faster object always wins. What if a statement could be both true and false at the exact same moment? This is the strange, unsettling world of paradoxes. These are not mere riddles. They are profound intellectual puzzles that have captivated thinkers for thousands of years. They challenge the very foundations of what we believe to be logical, sensible, true. A paradox is a statement, an idea, or a situation that appears to contradict itself, yet upon closer inspection reveals a deeper truth. It feels like a knot in the fabric of our reasoning. Our first reaction is disbelief. It must be a mistake. There has to be a simple flaw. But the best paradoxes are resilient. They resist easy solutions and push back against our attempts to unravel them. They expose the limits of our understanding, an inexplicably locked door demanding a new kind of key. Why wrestle with these impossible ideas? We learn to identify unstated rules and spot inconsistencies in news reports, business plans, personal beliefs. A paradox can take something solid like motion, identity, and reveal its fluid complexity. This journey into strangeness is essential for clearer, more creative thinking. Next, we'll explore 3 enduring paradoxes. Each is ancient yet echoes in the most modern dilemmas: the digital world, theoretical physics. We'll break down each paradox step by step, then connect them back to our lives today. Let us begin by examining a race that, logically, should never end. Okay, let's go. Imagine a foot race between 2 legendary figures, Achilles, the fastest warrior of ancient Greece, and a humble, slow-moving tortoise. To make the contest seem a little fairer, Achilles graciously gives the tortoise a head start of, let's say, 100 meters. The starting pistol fires, and the race begins. Our intuition tells us this is an easy win for Achilles. However, the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea constructed an argument to prove that logically, Achilles can never, ever catch the tortoise. His reasoning unfolds with a deceptive and frustrating simplicity that has puzzled minds for centuries. Here is how Zeno's logic works. For Achilles to catch the tortoise, he must first cover the 100 meters that separate them. But in the time it takes Achilles to run those 100 meters, the slow but steady tortoise has moved forward a small distance, perhaps just 1 meter. Now, Achilles is no longer 100 meters behind, but 1 meter. To catch the tortoise, he must now cover that remaining 1 meter. Yet, in the time it takes him to do that, the tortoise has once again crept forward, a tiny fraction of a meter. This process repeats itself endlessly. Achilles must always cover the new distance the tortoise has created, and in that time, the tortoise will always create another, smaller distance. The core of the paradox lies in the concept of infinity. Zeno argues that the distance between Achilles and the tortoise can be divided into an infinite number of smaller segments. Because Achilles must complete each of these segments one by one, he must perform an infinite number of tasks. And, Zeno concludes, it is impossible to complete an infinite number of tasks in a finite amount of time. Therefore, despite his superior speed, Achilles is logically doomed to get closer and closer forever, but never actually reach the tortoise. We watch him run, getting infinitesimally near, but the finish line of their personal duel remains forever out of reach, a mathematical mirage. Of course, we know from our real-world experience that this is not true. The resolution to the paradox had to wait over 2 millennia for the development of modern mathematics, specifically the concepts of limits and calculus. Mathematicians were able to prove that an infinite series of numbers can, in fact, add up to a finite, definite sum. The progressively smaller amounts of time it takes Achilles to cover the progressively smaller distances converge to a specific point in time when he does indeed catch and overtake the tortoise. But Zeno's puzzle remains profoundly important. It forced thinkers to grapple with the strange nature of infinity and motion, directly inspiring the mathematical tools we use today to model everything from planetary orbits, financial markets. A modern example can be seen in digital rendering. A computer creating a photorealistic image must calculate the paths of countless light rays, a task made possible by the same calculus that solves Zeno's puzzle. Right, so that's the gist. Let us journey to a bustling ancient harbor where a magnificent wooden ship is docked. This is the celebrated ship of Theseus. It is preserved by the city's people as a monument, a tangible piece of their history. Wood does not last forever. Salt air and the sea make planks rot. Caretakers begin careful restoration. They replace each decayed plank with a new, identical one. The process continues for decades, one plank at a time. After a century, every original plank has been replaced. The ship in the harbor now consists entirely of new materials. Is this still the ship of Theseus? On one hand, continuous existence, same space, same name, same function. The process was gradual. On the other hand, no physical component remains from the original. If identity depends on material, this can't be the same ship. The question challenges our definition of sameness. Now add another layer. The caretakers stored each old plank in a warehouse. A collector later reassembled those original planks. Now there are two ships before us. One, the continuously maintained harbor vessel. Two, the reassembled ship made from the original planks. Which is the true ship of Theseus? This thought experiment matters today. Consider your body. Most of your cells are replaced over years. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? The paradox applies to organizations. A company might change its name, change its CEO, change its employees, change its entire product line over 50 years. Is it still the same company? Consider software, Microsoft Word. Over decades, every line of original code rewritten. Yet we still call it Word. Its identity lies not in specific code, but in continuous function, in brand, in user experience. The ship of Theseus shows identity isn't fixed but depends on material, form, or history. Interesting, right? We now turn to a paradox born from the modern imagination, a staple of science fiction that probes the very logic of cause and effect, the grandfather paradox. Imagine a brilliant scientist builds the world's first time machine. Determined to test it, she decides to travel back in time 80 years. Her target destination is the town where her own grandfather lived as a young, unmarried man. Upon arriving in the past, she finds him. But then, through a tragic and unforeseen accident, she causes an event that prevents her grandfather from ever meeting the woman who would become her grandmother. They never fall in love. They never get married. They never have children. This single action creates a cascade of devastating logical consequences. If her grandparents never met, then one of her parents would never have been born, and if her parent was never born, then she, the time traveler, could never have been born either. She could not grow up to become a scientist. She could not build a time machine. She could not travel to the past. This creates an impossible, self-negating loop. Her action in the past preventing her grandparents from meeting entirely erases the cause of that action, her own existence. It is a perfect contradiction. The event happened, which means it could not have happened. This paradox presents a fundamental challenge to the notion of a single, alterable timeline. It suggests that if time travel to the past were possible, the universe would be filled with such logical impossibilities. Science fiction writers, theoretical physicists. One of the most popular ideas is the fixed timeline, also called the self-consistency hypothesis. This theory posits that the past is unchangeable. You can travel to the past, but you cannot alter it in any way that would create a paradox. Any attempt you make to change history was, in fact, always part of history, and will ultimately lead to the very outcome you were trying to prevent. Another compelling solution is the multiverse, also called the many worlds theory. In this view, the act of changing the past doesn't alter your own timeline. It causes a new, parallel universe to branch off from the original. So, when the time traveler prevents her grandparents from meeting, she has successfully done so, but only in this new timeline. In this alternate reality, she will indeed never be born. However, she herself originated from the original timeline where her grandparents did meet, and she was born. By traveling back, she has simply left her home universe and become a visitor in a new one that she irrevocably altered. A modern example appears in discussions about quantum computing. Particles can exist in multiple states at once. That hints at a reality far more branched and complex than our single-threaded experience suggests. So, that's the tangle for now. After journeying through these three monumental puzzles, from the endless race of Achilles to the fragmented identity of a ship and the tangled logic of time travel, we can see they are more than just clever riddles. Paradoxes serve a vital function in the ecosystem of human thought. They are intellectual alarm bells, ringing when our logic enters territory it can't yet handle. They reveal hidden cracks, showing us where our assumptions are weak. An idea we think is simple, like motion, identity, causality, is suddenly exposed as a deep and mysterious concept under a paradox. Paradoxes are not dead ends. They drive intellectual progress. Zeno's arguments about motion and infinity helped fuel the development of calculus centuries later. The Ship of Theseus forces philosophers and legal scholars to rethink identity, with practical impacts on corporate law and personal identity in a digital age. The grandfather paradox, while speculative, drives physicists to test the limits of our theories about time, space, and the fundamental structure of the universe. In this way, paradoxes are invaluable educational tools. For a teacher, they demonstrate a gap in a student's reasoning without saying, "You're wrong." Instead, the paradox invites the student on a journey to discover the flaw themselves. For scientists, they act as stress tests for theories. If a new theory leads to a paradox, it's a signal the theory may be incomplete or incorrect. They are the grit in the oyster of knowledge, the irritating inconsistency that can create a beautiful pearl of understanding. They are not enemies of reason, but its most demanding and rewarding training partners. Ultimately, the gift of a paradox is the gift of wonder. In a world chasing quick answers and simple certainties, a good paradox forces us to slow down and embrace ambiguity. It reminds us the universe is stranger and more complex than intuition suggests. It reawakens childlike curiosity. Why? What if? Sometimes the most productive state is not knowing, but active questioning. The limits of our logic are not walls, but horizons inviting us to journey further. These great philosophical paradoxes may seem to belong to the world of ancient Greece or futuristic science fiction far removed from the concerns of our daily lives. However, the kind of thinking they demand is a skill that can be applied everywhere. The world is full of smaller, everyday paradoxes and puzzles that hide in plain sight. In our workplaces, in our social interactions, even in the simple rules we follow. Learning to spot them is like learning to see a new color. Once you know what to look for, you start to notice it everywhere, making the world a more interesting and textured place. Consider, for example, the paradox of choice. Research has shown that while we believe more options will make us happier, having too many choices can actually lead to anxiety, indecision, dissatisfaction. A shopper standing paralyzed in a cereal aisle with 100 different boxes is living a small version of this paradox. We desire freedom and choice, but an excess of it can become a burden. This is a contradiction between our expectation and the reality of our psychology. Recognizing this can help us design better systems, make better decisions, understand our own frustrations in a world saturated with options. Another common example is the liar paradox, which can be simplified into the sentence, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must be false, as it claims. But if the statement is false, then it must be true, because it is indeed a false statement. This logical loop can show up in communication. Imagine a manager who says, "My door is always open, but I appreciate it when my team solves problems without bothering me." The conflicting messages create a small paradox for employees, who are unsure whether they are truly welcome or not. Spotting this helps us communicate with greater clarity and avoid creating confusion for others. You can practice this skill with simple riddles that play on our assumptions. For instance, a man lives on the 10th floor of an apartment building. Every day he takes the elevator down to the ground floor to go to work. When he returns in the evening, he takes the elevator to the 7th floor and then walks up the remaining 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. Why does he do this? The answer, that the man is too short to reach the button for the 10th floor, is a mini paradox. It works because we make an unstated assumption that the person operating the elevator is of average height. The riddle forces us to question that assumption. This kind of playful puzzle trains the same mental muscles needed to tackle the larger, more profound paradoxes. When you encounter a statement or situation that feels contradictory and makes your brain ache, the natural tendency is to either dismiss it as nonsense or give up in frustration. However, with a structured approach, facing a paradox can become a productive and even enjoyable exercise. The first and most crucial step is simply to slow down. Do not rush to a conclusion. Read the problem several times. Listen to the problem several times. Pay close attention to the precise wording of every part of the argument. Paradoxes often hide their secrets in the fine print. A single misunderstood word can throw off your entire analysis. Next, you must become a detective and hunt for hidden assumptions. Every logical argument is built upon a foundation of premises, ideas that are taken for granted as true. In many paradoxes, the contradiction arises because one of these foundational assumptions is flawed. It is so deeply ingrained in our thinking that we don't even notice it. In Zeno's paradox, the hidden assumption was that an infinite number of tasks must take an infinite amount of time. To solve it, we had to challenge that very idea. Ask yourself, what must be true for this argument to work? Am I assuming something about time? Am I assuming something about space? Am I assuming something about identity? Am I assuming something about logic? Once you have identified the key terms and potential assumptions, try to test the idea with smaller, simpler examples. Can you scale the problem down? For the ship of Theseus, instead of a whole ship, consider a simple hammer. Replace the handle, replace the head. Does that clarify your thinking about its identity? Breaking a large, intimidating problem into smaller, more manageable pieces can often reveal where the logic begins to break down. This process of testing the boundaries helps you understand the scope and limits of the paradoxical claim. Finally, be open to considering multiple different solutions or interpretations. Paradoxes rarely have one single, universally accepted answer. They can be resolved in different ways depending on the framework you use. The grandfather paradox can be solved with a fixed timeline. The grandfather paradox can be solved with a multiverse. The ship of Theseus can be resolved by prioritizing material composition. The ship of Theseus can be resolved by prioritizing historical continuity. Instead of searching for the right answer, explore a right answer and understand why it works. This habit of embracing multiple perspectives is one of the most valuable rewards of engaging with these profound puzzles. In the end, paradoxes should not be seen as enemies of logic or reason. They are, in fact, some of reason's most valuable and powerful tools. They are the whetstones that sharpen our intellectual blades, forcing us to be more precise, more careful, and more creative in our thinking. When logic appears to fail, as it so often does when confronted with a good paradox, it is not a sign that reason itself is flawed. Rather, it is a signal that our current application of reason is incomplete. It shows us that our map of reality has a blank spot, an area marked "Here be dragons," inviting us to become explorers and chart that unknown territory. These puzzles teach us a profound intellectual humility. They remind us that our grasp on even the most basic concepts, like motion, identity, time, this humility is a hallmark of a great thinker. Knowledge is not a destination you arrive at, but a continuous journey of refinement, questioning, and discovery. A mind that has wrestled with a paradox is a mind less likely to fall into the trap of dogmatism or simplistic certainty. It is a mind that has learned to be comfortable with ambiguity and to see questions as being just as valuable, if not more so, than answers. The patterns of thought required to unravel a paradox are the same patterns required for innovation in any field. An entrepreneur who spots a contradiction in the market, a need that no one is serving, is using paradoxical thinking. A scientist who notices an experimental result that contradicts established theory is on the path to a new discovery. A diplomat who finds a way to reconcile the seemingly opposing interests of two nations is solving a real-world paradox. In every case, the process involves challenging assumptions, redefining terms, creating a new framework that can hold two conflicting ideas in a productive tension. Therefore, the next time you encounter an idea that makes your head spin, an argument that seems to tie itself in knots, Do not turn away. Embrace the confusion. Lean into the discomfort. See it not as a failure of sense, but as an invitation to think on a higher level. A paradox is a gateway to a deeper understanding, a chance to see the hidden architecture of our thoughts and to rebuild it on a stronger foundation. It is a chance to participate in the age-old conversation about the nature of reality, and in doing so, to grow as a thinker and as a human being. We have journeyed through races that never end, ships that are and are not themselves, timelines that fold back to erase their own origins.